Good evening. Thank you for joining us for the June 25th meeting of the Lowell Conservation Commission. I'd like to start off continued business. We have an RDA from Keolis Commuter Services. They've asked for a slight delay. They'll be joining us shortly, so we're going to come back to that item. Next up is a request for a certificate of compliance. Atlantic Oliver 2, 240 Industrial Ave LLC, project location 240 Industrial Ave East. A request for COC has been filed by Atlantic Oliver for their order of conditions issued April 24 to expand and modify the existing parking area at 240 Industrial Ave East. Anybody here to speak on behalf of this project?
It's me, Jared Grano with Allen & Major Associates, the civil engineer for the project on Zoom.
Good evening.
Good evening. Yeah, so we had gotten that order of conditions issued on April 17th, 2024 for a plan set that was approved on March 19th, dated March 19th, 2024. So this is for work on the northeast side of the existing property. Minor additional disturbance to what was out there pre-existing to the proposed redevelopment, but we're just doing a little bit of loading dock reconstruction on that side of the building. The work's been finished, it's stabilized. There wasn't any extended limit of work that was touched that wasn't approved based on the original NOI that was issued for this property. I issued the as-built plans and the site photos. The site looks good. Everything's per our approved plans. So we're here to request the certificate of compliance for the work that was done.
It looks to me like a vast improvement. Everything is stabilized. The loading dock looks leaps and bounds better than that corner of the building did before. I was very happy with the work. Does anybody have any comments?
I'll make a motion to issue a certificate of compliance for this project.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All right, next up is a request for determination of applicability from Lowell Parks and Conservation Trust. Project location 36 Merrill Street and 15 Davidson Street. A request for determination of applicability has been filed by the Lowell Parks and Conservation Trust to engage in invasive species management at Jolene Dubner Park and along the Concord River Greenway. All work is within the 100-foot buffer zone of the Concord River. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Jane Calvin. I'm the Executive Director of the Lowell Parks and Conservation Trust. Thank you for hearing about this project tonight. We're kind of excited about it. As you all undoubtedly know, invasives are a big issue in the city. And there are two properties that the Trust manages both Jolene Dubner Park and the Concord River Greenway that are both city parks. But we take on a large stewardship role for both of those locations. Both locations have intensive issues with Japanese knotweed, and we have started working with a consultant, Brian Colleran, who should be on the Zoom call and can probably give you some more details. But he came and visited both sites, gave us some technical specifications. He's actually conducting a lot of data on invasive removal. And in a nutshell, what we'd like to do is go out with volunteers, knock down the knotweed, to almost waist height. It's very specific in terms of the nodules that you have to, the number of nodules that you have to hit. Then we go back 2 weeks later, take off whatever's grown again, and then we go back 2 weeks later. And at that point, you've really minimized the amount of resources that the knotweed has to grow. And so then after that, Brian will come in and actually inject each individual knotweed stem as long as he has enough space to work with. The chemicals that he uses are similar to Roundup, but when you and I buy Roundup in a store, it comes with all kinds of things that end up in the waterway and have a long life. The chemicals that he uses are very, very, very specific. I'll let him speak to that more, but they do not have a long life in the waterway at all. And that's why we've come to you, because we know that this work is being done right on the banks, but we also have really intensive erosion issues at both locations. At the Greenway, he will most likely be spraying and not doing injections just because of accessibility issues. If Brian's on the call, I'd love to have him chime in.
Sure.
You might not be on the call. I don't see anyone named Brian in here.
Okay. Ecological management solutions. Okay. Well, with the application, you received all kinds of technical papers and the specs and such. So I'd be happy to take any questions.
I would love the opportunity to speak with him. Would you mind if we come back to this and try to get him to join us on the phone?
Yeah, I can try. Yeah,
If you don't mind.
yeah.
Thank you. All right, we're going to come back to that one as well. In the new business section, we have a request for determination of applicability. The City of Lowell is requesting an RDA for Aiken Street Bridge. An RDA has been filed by the City of Lowell to resurface the Aiken Street Bridge. All work is located within the 100-foot buffer zone of the Merrimack River.
Good evening.
Hi.
My name is Andrew Masner. I work with TEC representing Lowell. Just want to give you a quick overview of the project, what we're thinking here. So it's pretty simple. We're basically removing the epoxy overlay on the bridge, and then after that doing some minor concrete patching, and then replacing the epoxy overlay in kind. So we don't anticipate any impacts to the riverfront area, the banks, anything like that. All the work will be contained to the bridge itself. In our specifications, the contractor will be sure to not have any discharge, any debris fall into the river itself. So happy to field any other questions you may have about this.
Typically when we're talking about dislodging, solid surfaces near a waterway, we'd request netting underneath the bridge. Is that being considered here?
Yeah, we have shielding in our specifications.
Say that word for me again.
Shielding.
Okay.
Some timber shielding on the
Okay.
bottom, so
right.
that should contain everything.
That's all I need.
I just read that something like this hasn't been done since the 90s.
Correct.
So it seems like it's definitely needed.
Yeah, it's very patchy right now, so that's why we're kind of going through replacing it, preserving the bridge.
Okay, any other questions?
Is there going to be equipment that's going to be stored or held near the riverway?
We're not anticipating any staging needed. Everything will just be during work hours for this.
All right, I'll make a motion to grant this project a -3 determination.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Next up, we have a request for certificate of compliance. Mark James, 84 East Avenue. A request for a certificate of compliance has been filed by Mark James for their order of conditions issued July 1999. Is there anybody here on behalf of this project? Hearing none. I'd like a moment to just bring up the drawings for the request. So this is this is a request for a certificate of compliance to close out NOI number 206457 to build a single-family home in the late 90s. The applicant is seeking to sell their home and needs this certificate of compliance as administrative step to clear the title. There's not much to do here, I don't think.
Well, I'll make a motion to grant the certificate of compliance.
I'll second that.
Seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. We can take the opportunity to review the May 14th meeting minutes. Anybody have any comments, questions, concerns?
I had no comments.
A motion to approve them.
Motion by Marie,
A second.
seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, meeting minutes are approved. I'd like to resume conversation about 36 Merrill Street, 15 Davidson Street. Hi again, Jane.
Hi. Just waiting for Brian to get on the Zoom.
All right.
But if you want to shoot me any questions that you might have.
Yeah, my questions are really about the application itself, the way that it changes because we're in waterways. I'm thrilled that this is going underway. I would love to see a successful volunteer-led charge for invasive species removal. It's something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about, and having the potential to a roadmap is very exciting. So thank you for undergoing even, as far as you've considered so far. Do you want to tell us more about where you're at and some of your schedule for this work?
Is Brian on? Okay, great, thank you. If I could add, what I forgot to add before was that I really see this as a pilot, and I want us to be testing out a pilot, for other locations in the city. It's not cheap, but I think we have some issues here that are infrastructure issues. It's getting into the infrastructure of the Concord River Greenway. It's getting into the shoreline of Jolene Dubner Park, and not only can you not see the view, but we're losing some of the river embankment. So I understand that Brian is on the call.
I am. I made it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian.
Good evening, Brian. Thanks for joining us. Jane outlined some of the specifics as to, the cutting by volunteers over several 2-week intervals, and then eventual injection, if possible, and or spraying. Can you give us a little bit more detail as to, the thought process behind what's going on here when you're doing several cuts to the knotweed?
Yeah. Interrupt me if I end up going down the wrong rabbit hole, because these are all very near topics, how they relate to each other and whatnot. So please interrupt the monologue if I hit it. But the logic of knotweed control is really kind of fine details and worrying them out in the way that suits the scenario. But broadly, we're starting from this point where you want to weaken the knotweed as much as possible to minimize the herbicide usage. And this is a logical exercise, right? The peer review material that really supports this doesn't exist because basically land managers and scientists, they don't get together too often to put together this kind of detail. But there is recent work from Minnesota showing that right about now, the knotweed is at the lowest carbohydrate stores in the year, right? So it's come off of winter, it's utilized all of its energy to put up the leaves and the stems, and so it's at the lowest point. And so rather than allowing it to take advantage of the growing season and recover and regrow its stores of resources, that then if you were to come in and do manual removal, chemical removal, any other kind of management activity later on in the year, the plant will have more energy available, right? So we're taking it at its lowest point in the season and trying to bring it lower. And then again, trying to bring it lower and basically trying to deny it the growing season, the value of the growing season.
That makes sense
At
to
which
me. The way that I had been thinking about it previously was, you know, that it has a massive amount of energy in its root ball. Every time you cut it and it has to re-sprout, it uses more energy than it would if it's just continuing to grow, right? So the idea is to like gas out the plant by a few cuttings.
Right.
And so
Right, and
to
there's
hear
a
this
logic
idea of the
to that, too,
carbohydrates,
so.
I really like, you know, that sounds great to me. That makes perfect sense. How are you cutting this knotweed? Because I understand that it's a rhizome, which means that it is growing from splinter-like fragments of itself, which is why it's often found along the rivers and waterways, is because it's mowed or it's cut, and then it gets into the water and it travels downstream and it grows into the bank. It's similar along highways where we're mowing it down on major routes 2 or 3 times a year and just chopping it up into splinters and making it multiply endlessly. It's really a failed practice by most of our public systems, I really think due to lack of knowledge and time and cost, but we're certainly not making the situation better. Anyway, how are you planning on doing the cutting to minimize the splintering, the spreading? How are you collecting it?
Yeah. So there's a minor detail we need to correct in your language that changes everything, right? It's not the splinters that matter, as you put it. It's the nodes, right? The nodes are like little bundles of stem cells, which, you know, just as you described, they do all that, right? But because the nodes are the problem, you don't have to necessarily worry about the whole plant that you're cutting down and managing, right? Like loose leaves aren't going to grow into new plants, right? So you don't have to be perfectly tidy, but you do, anything you cut down, you do have to gather, you know, the stems, the branches, because they contain the nodes. You know, like you were saying with the rhizomes, the nodes are underground and above ground as well. So there's, if you were to leave something behind, there's that risk. And we discussed how they would take care of this, and it's just gonna go into the regular waste stream and be, you know, brought to the incinerator. There's no composting, there's no risk of green waste being commingled with knotweed waste. So do you want me to keep going, or was that enough for that?
I'm actually curious about something that you just said. Well, tell me more about where it's being disposed of.
It is being put in the regular garbage.
Yeah, bagged and thrown away.
Right.
Big
Perfect.
black contractor bags.
Yeah, as it should be. I mean, we're told not to put green waste in the general disposal, but in this case, invasive species should be thrown away in this method. I agree wholeheartedly. I'd like to talk a little bit about chemical application. Can you tell us briefly about the chemicals that you'll be using, and is it the same for both injection and for spraying?
Yes. That's the easy one. It's the same chemical. So I'm going to back my way into the answer for a moment, because the chemical is glyphosate, right? And glyphosate as an active ingredient, lots of people have heard about. The formulation, though, that I'm using is important, and this is the water-safe formulation. The idea being that, you know, the difference between what I'm proposing, which is Aquaneat, the brand name, the difference between Aquaneat and, you know, Roundup, which people have heard of, you know, my story is like, well, if you go down to the aisle in the grocery store with the dish soap, they'll show you Dawn and those, the advertising for Dawn is that they can clean an oil spill off a duck, right? That is a whole other level of soap than, say, Dr. Bronner's. But they're both still soap, right? It's not that Dr. Bronner's has soap that's less good or less functional. It's all the other chemistry put into the material to make the soap stronger, deeper, 33% better grease cutting, right? And that same kind of thinking applies to the difference between Roundup in a glyphosate, sorry, I just did that backwards, glyphosate in a Roundup product or glyphosate in the Aquanit product. And it's all of those extra additives that are trade secrets that, I couldn't tell you anything about, but they've been removed from the equation. And so that's a big part of what makes them friendlier as a product, right? And the other part being, this is slightly darker, but so it goes. It's either kill the knotweed and like maybe do some harm in killing the knotweed, right? Or leave the knotweed and allow the harm to grow, right? And so it's either habitat loss and elimination and just wastelandification via knotweed, right? Because if I called it a desert, if I called it a green desert, that'd be insulting deserts. They're very biodiverse places. Right? It's a wasteland. And the knotweed, if you get rid of it, something will come back. And right, there might be a secondary or tertiary invasion. And that's a whole other ball of wax. But you can start moving forward towards a solution as opposed to just, crying into your glass and allowing it to get worse. And so, it's a bit of a triage mentality as well.
Thanh you.
But yeah, I'll pause there.
Yeah, no, so I wholeheartedly agree with you that a little bit of glyphosate used effectively, while we don't want to use any more than we have to, is better than what we see along our waterways, which is pretty much knotweed, bittersweet, the knotweed taking over the entire landscape and the bittersweet growing up and choking out our trees. I think that we have some serious reckoning to witness in the next, generation to see the effects of what is going on along our waterways. It's pretty much the only two plants within 10 feet of the waterway, pretty much everywhere you look. And in some cases, much, much, much more than that. So I support the thesis of controlled minimizing chemicals over letting these invasive species run rampant.
Right. And
Can you
I just want to interject here. This is a good point to mention that the injection versus spray, there's not really an improvement in outcomes necessarily. Like it just comes out in the wash. But the point of injection is to minimize the earliest phase when the most herbicide is going to be used. It's to minimize any of it getting into the environment, right? It's going straight from the tool to the target, and it never gets out into the air, never gets onto the soil. And you only get one opportunity for that, because afterwards, all of the knotweeds that will have escaped you, that will have recovered, that will have survived, none of them will get big enough to be injected again.
Interesting. What is your proposed rate of reduction over the course of 1 year treatment over 3-5 years? How long does this take?
So, according to the internet, it's a 3 to 5 year job. I have been playing with the technique a little bit, and a couple of places that I tried something new on last year were clean this spring. And so it was a 3 treatment, 1 year, and it was one and done for these places, which, was pretty cool. So there's a chance that this could be a 2-year job if everything runs well, but knotweed is a bit of a boogeyman. This is what you tell your incoming environmental scientist bedtime ghost stories about, because unless you were to excavate it and dig it up and actually sift the soil, I couldn't tell you. There are stories out of England where the knotweed, after supposedly being eliminated, it's more like it's comatose rather than dead. So, in theory, it can be functionally, ecologically taken out of the scene in a 2 to 3 year time frame, based on what kind of responses I'm getting from similar work elsewhere in the Commonwealth and New England. But there's always going to be an asterisk on any presumed success.
I understand what you're getting at. The 3 to 5 year timeline is what I would, expect to and have hired people to do in the past. They often quoted a 60% reduction over the first year, hitting 90% in 3 years, and, maybe you get to 95 over 5 years. It's never really like this stuff you might never be able to kill. It does sound like you have an effective treatment or the start of something worth studying deeper. I'm very, I said this to Jane before you were on, I'm thrilled at the opportunity to watch some real study firsthand. I've spent plenty of time down there on the Concord River Greenway, and I intend to, witness a lot of this in person.
I'm going to make you collect data. Careful.
Go ahead, sorry.
I'm going to make you collect data if you're going to be spending all the time down there. Careful.
Yeah, no, I'm into it. I'll be there. We'll meet. The last kind of question I have is how would your practice differ if you were to be working outside of the wetland buffer? What would you do if you didn't have to come see us and use the least amount of chemicals in the waterway as possible?
I don't think anything would change. I think it's just the paperwork, honestly.
Okay, that's great. That answer is to me an enormous green flag. That says that while this is a labor-intensive method that will take a lot more hand cutting over several different 2-week intervals, that there's a real chance here of reducing chemicals, and we have sorry, I forget what your title is as a invasive species remover.
That works. Let's go with invasive species remover. I'm game.
All right. Red stamped. I like it.
So let me answer that question a little bit differently, because now that I understand it a little bit better, my arrangement, right, the way that I put things together, I wouldn't change the chemical proposed, but I do offer variations in intensity, right? So the methodology selected with the 3 cuts and then the two treatments later on is about as an aggressive a technique as there is available. There are variations where you could step it down, the aggression and the commitment to the job, but as you were alluding to before, that changes some of your percentages, right? So this might result in 90% success after 1 year, whereas not doing the manual labor might have resulted in 80 or 85% success, right? But that 5% is really critical when you're dealing with like a compounding interest type of challenge, right? Which is what the knotweed's doing underground. It recovers and regroups and, changes its growth habits. So yeah, I just thought I wanted to answer that question a little bit better now that I, with your answer, understood it better.
That's fine. That makes perfect sense. I've been asked by a lot of people about this specific item. I'm very satisfied with the answers that I've received here tonight. I hope that the city is taking some notes as to some best practices here, and seeing as you may be about to hire him to work on your land, or if you haven't already, on the city's land, that the city is aware of what's going on, and hopefully we have the opportunity to expand some of this to protect our waterways. We've got a new ad campaign here in the city that says that we do food, and if we do water, then we only need shelter left to get the basic human necessities. So 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Let's go for it. That said, does anybody have any questions?
I have one question about a different method that I've heard about, and you seem very knowledgeable. Have you ever heard of a method where you take mesh wiring and put it down and it essentially chokes the knotweed out? And if so, have you ever used it? Have you seen it work?
I have seen it fail.
Okay.
The problem with that technique, other than the fact that it's super expensive, because knotweed that you can see is a bit like a donut hole, and the part that you can't see is a bit like the rest of the donut. So if you're gonna mesh a donut hole and the donut potentially is gonna regrow, you know, that's a lot of landscaping that you got to deal with, which is another reason why most manual labor of any kind, mechanical, cultural, they just don't work because they don't account for the entire plant, really. But the problem specifically with that method is that the knotweed starts small enough and it grows up. And actually, instead of choking itself out, I've got pictures for this on my other computer. If I'd known you were going to ask this, I would have had these.
That would have been awesome.
It actually, I've snapped it off, and you see the grid in the plant because the plant grows up above the mesh, and then what I'm blanking on the word, the opportunistic roots that come off the stem, they back grow, and then they actually smother and encompass the mesh. And so the mesh is in the plant. It hasn't actually functioned as intended. And so to get a small enough mesh to actually do that job, you've got to get down to, like, functionally, they don't sell that. And so the idea is solid and the logic works, but in execution, the plant will not succumb.
Cool. Thank you very much.
So it gets bionic and then it becomes sentient right after that.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I'd like to set for a motion for a -3 determination.
Okay, motion made,
I'll second.
seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much.
Great, and I'll look forward to showing you guys around a little bit and showing you how to collect data.
We will be getting some details from Jane about her her volunteer parties over there.
Excellent. All right,
Thank
well,
you.
good night, everyone, and enjoy, and good luck with the rest of the meeting.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks.
All right, thanks, Jane. Bye.
All right. Seeing as we're totally out of order tonight, we're going to return to the first item, a request for determination of applicability, Keolis Commuter Services, project location, vegetation management in the MBTA right-of-way. An RDA has been filed by Keolis Commuter Services to renew the wetlands map along the right-of-way in order to continue vegetation management activities as outlined in the proposed 26 to 30 vegetation management plan. Do we have anybody online with us?
Yes, hello everyone. This is Matt Donovan from Benish, here to represent Keolis.
Good evening. You want to tell us a little bit more about what you got going on over here?
Yeah, so this RDA is submitted to your commission every 5 years and is to confirm the accuracy of the maps used for vegetation management along the commuter rail right-of-way. We are required to get these determinations before submitting the vegetation management plan to Mass DAR for approval. The plan is designed to manage and control vegetation necessary to keep the railroad in operation safe, and there are sensitive area restrictions to keep the listed in CMR 11.04 to keep the sensitive areas protected throughout the duration of the plan. The maps we provide you with are mainly made for the chemical portion of the plan, but often dictate where mechanical methods will be used due to the chemical restriction. And I'm just pulling up my maps here now, so you can have them in front of you. Each year there are 2 main chemical applications, one in the May to June timeframe, and one that targets the roadbed, and one in the August-September timeframe that targets the brush in the areas adjacent to the roadbed. The sensitive areas that are marked with blue and yellow on the maps are restricted from the brush program and will only receive the roadbed application. So that's what I'll focus on because it's the only chemical program taking place in the areas of your jurisdiction. However, if you do have questions of the brush program, I'm happy to answer those as well. The roadbed application is performed by a spray truck that drives directly on the track, equipped with nozzles on the backside that sprays the solution directly down onto the track. It has nozzles on the side that targets the shoulders of the roadbed up to 12 feet from the center line of the track. The certified applicator is always accompanied by an environmental monitor, familiar with the site conditions and equipped with these maps, instructing the operator as necessary. The applicator has the ability to turn off all the nozzles, or in many cases, just the side nozzles where it's spraying the shoulders, where maybe getting close to the buffer zone of a sensitive area. The yellow zones will never receive any treatment to the shoulders. However, it may receive treatment directly down onto the ties. That's done at the environmental monitor and applicator's discretion to keep it within the regulations. The blue zones will typically receive the full roadbed treatment. These typically represent being within 10 to 100 feet of a sensitive area. They'll be sprayed just that roadbed program at a 1-year interval. In the dark blue zones, which I don't believe you have any dark blue zones in your town, that would be every other year, and that's more so of a DEP or water supply zone. In these blue and yellow areas, due to the limited chemical application, especially in the areas adjacent to the track where they're not able to apply that brush program, more effort is put into controlling the vegetation with physical and mechanical measures. The chemicals each year are taken from the approved sensitive area material list provided by Mass Department of Agricultural Resources, made specifically for rights-of-way. We do include each year's program in the yearly operational plan that we send to your commission every year via certified mail. We are seeking a positive 2A determination to confirm the maps, as well as a negative determination for the work included in the vegetation management plan. I am happy to open the floor up to the commission and answer any questions you may have.
I don't have any issue with this. I mean, comments from the city request a thorough cleaning, that there's a lot of dry brush. That seems as reasonable a request as any here.
Is there anything different compared to 5 years ago? Or
No,
is
the
this
plan
basically
itself
the
is-
same?
Yeah, yep.
Okay.
All right, so the request was a positive 2A determination
Yeah.
on the mapping, and a negative 3 determination on the project itself. Hearing no comments, I'd take a motion.
I'll make a motion to issue a positive 2 on the mapping and a negative 3 determination on the project.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
So while we were waiting for the invasive species remover, we managed to bang through the rest of the agenda. Dylan, I know that you were working with Jane and getting, I forget her consultant's name, but getting him online. Do you have any questions about what we went through during that time?
No questions. The request for certificate of compliance for 84E staff was approved. That was the only. Yep.
All right. Any comments? Anything from you?
No comments from us.
All right. Anybody else? Final word?
Motion to adjourn?
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Seconded.
Good night.